I need you to sit with me for a moment, because what happened to Vanessa Coleman is something doctors themselves could barely explain, let alone the husband who nearly destroyed his own marriage over it. Vanessa was 7 months pregnant when her husband looked her dead in the eye and told her he wanted a DNA test done on their unborn child because someone had whispered a lie into his ear that he could not shake loose. She agreed, certain that science would clear her name in an instant. Instead, the results came back and said something that no doctor in that hospital had ever seen before, something that made her husband pack a bag and walk out the door before she even had the chance to explain herself, because there was nothing she could say that would have made sense of it at the time. It would take a team of geneticists, a furious mother-in-law, and one very rare secret buried inside Vanessa's own body since before she was even born, to finally reveal the truth. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming amazing videos. My name is Vanessa Coleman, and before I tell you what happened to me and my husband Derek, I need you to understand something about the two of us, because without that understanding, none of what came later will make any sense at all. Derek and I met in Charlotte, North Carolina, back when I was 24 years old, working as a pediatric nurse at a hospital downtown, and he was finishing his final year of law school, working part-time at a firm that handled family law cases. We were introduced by a mutual friend at a cookout, and within 6 months we were inseparable. Derek was steady, careful, the kind of man who thought through every decision 3 times before making it, which is exactly the kind of man I thought I needed after growing up in a house where my own father made every decision on impulse and left my mother to clean up the mess each time. We got married 2 years later in a small ceremony at my grandmother's church, and for the first 4 years of our marriage, things were good. Not perfect, no marriage is perfect, but good, steady, the kind of good that made me believe we had built something that could survive whatever life threw at it. We tried for almost 3 years to have a baby before it finally happened. 3 years of appointments, 3 years of watching other people announce pregnancies, while we sat in waiting rooms getting news that made us go quiet in the car on the ride home. So when I finally saw those 2 lines on the test, I sat on the bathroom floor and cried for 20 minutes before I even had the strength to walk out and tell Derek. He cried too. He picked me up off that floor and held me so tight I could barely breathe, and he kept saying, "We did it, Vanessa, we actually did it." For the first 4 months of that pregnancy, I do not think either of us had ever been happier in our entire lives. The trouble started, though I did not know it at the time, with a woman named Renata Foster, who was Derek's cousin on his father's side. A woman I had never particularly gotten along with, though I had always been polite to her at family gatherings for Derek's sake. Renata had never liked me, not from the very first time Derek brought me around to meet his extended family, and over the years I had come to understand that some of that dislike came from the fact that Renata had once dated a man who left her for a woman who, according to Derek's mother, looked a great deal like me. I never took it personally. People carry old wounds into new relationships all the time, and I figured Renata's coldness toward me was simply her own baggage that had nothing to do with who I actually was. But somewhere around my 5th month of pregnancy, Renata began making comments, small ones at first, the kind that are easy to dismiss as harmless teasing until you realize they are being repeated with intention. She would say things at family dinners like, "Vanessa sure is glowing a lot for someone whose husband works such long hours," or, "It is a shame Derek has been so busy with that Whitfield case. Must be nice having so much company while he's gone." I brushed it off every single time. I did not think Derek was even paying attention to these comments because he never said anything about them to me directly. I did not realize that Renata was not simply making these comments in front of me. She was making them to Derek privately as well, in phone calls and text messages I never saw, slowly, deliberately planting a seed of doubt into my husband's mind about a man named Isaac Marsh, a neighbor of ours who lived 2 doors down, a widower in his early 50s who had, admittedly, become something of a friend to me during Derek's busiest months at the firm. Isaac was a kind man, a retired contractor who had lost his wife to cancer 3 years earlier, and during the months when Derek was working 80-hour weeks trying to make partner at his firm, Isaac had gotten into the habit of checking on me, bringing over groceries when I was too exhausted from morning sickness to go to the store myself, fixing a leaking faucet in our kitchen without being asked, sitting on our porch with me some evenings just to keep an old pregnant woman company, as he used to joke, even though I was only 29. There was never anything romantic between us. I loved my husband completely, and Isaac, in his own words, saw me the way he would have wanted someone to look after his own daughter if she had lived nearby instead of across the country in Seattle. But Renata took the simple, ordinary kindness of a lonely older neighbor and, through a series of careful comments made over months, twisted it into something that began to eat away at Derek from the inside without me ever knowing a single thing about it. By my 7th month of pregnancy, Derek had grown distant in ways I could not fully explain to myself at the time. He started coming home later than usual, even on nights when he did not have court filings due. He stopped reaching for my hand in the car the way he always used to. He would look at me sometimes with an expression I could not place, something between sadness and suspicion, and when I asked him what was wrong, he would simply say he was tired, that work was stressful, and he would change the subject before I could push any further. It all came to a head on a Tuesday evening in April. I remember the date because it was 3 days before my baby shower, which my sister had spent months planning. Derek came home from work and sat across from me at our kitchen table without taking off his coat, which was unusual for him, and he told me, in a voice so flat and careful it barely sounded like his own, that he wanted a paternity test done on the baby. I want you to understand what that moment felt like for me. I had been faithful to my husband every single day of our marriage. I had never once given him a reason to doubt me. And here he was, sitting across from me with our child growing inside my body, asking me to prove, through a needle and a lab report, that the baby I was carrying belonged to him. I asked him why, my voice shaking, and he would not look me in the eye when he answered. He said only that he had heard things, that people had noticed things, that he needed to know for certain before the baby arrived, because he could not spend the rest of his life wondering. I begged him to tell me who had said what to him, but he refused, protecting Renata even in that moment, though I would not learn her name was attached to any of it until much later. I remember standing in my own kitchen, 7 months pregnant, feeling like the ground beneath me had cracked open without warning. I agreed to the test. I want to be clear about that, because some people, when they hear this story, assume I fought him on it, that I refused out of some kind of guilt. I did not refuse. I agreed immediately, because I knew the truth, and I believed, foolishly perhaps, that the truth would fix everything, that once the results came back, Derek would see how wrong he had been, and we could begin repairing whatever damage this had done to us. We went to a private genetics clinic 2 weeks later, a place recommended by Derek's own family law connections, a place that specialized in prenatal paternity testing through a procedure called non-invasive prenatal testing, which analyzes fetal DNA fragments found in the mother's bloodstream, meaning I did not even need an invasive procedure like an amniocentesis. They drew my blood, they drew Derek's blood, and they told us the results would take approximately 10 business days. Those 10 days were some of the longest of my entire life. Derek moved into our guest bedroom without discussing it with me first. He barely spoke to me except when necessary. My sister, Camille, wanted to cancel the baby shower altogether, certain that something had gone terribly wrong in our marriage, but I insisted we go through with it, because I refused to let this ugliness touch anything else in my life until I had answers in hand. The shower happened. I smiled through it, and the entire time I felt like I was standing outside my own body, watching someone else pretend to be happy. The results came back on a Thursday afternoon. Derek asked to meet me at the clinic in person rather than have them mailed or emailed to us separately, which I appreciated at the time, because I thought it meant he wanted to face this together, whatever the outcome. We sat across from a genetic counselor named Dr. Patricia Nwosu, a composed, careful woman who had clearly delivered difficult news to families more times than she could count. She opened the folder in front of her, and I remember watching her face very closely, trying to read something in her expression before she even spoke a single word. She told us that the test results were inconclusive, in a way she had genuinely never encountered before in her 15 years of practicing genetic medicine. She explained that ordinarily, a paternity test compares specific genetic markers between the alleged father and the fetal DNA fragments circulating in the mother's blood, and typically the results are clear. Either the markers match closely enough to confirm paternity beyond any reasonable doubt, or they do not match at all, ruling paternity out entirely. But in our case, she said, the fetal DNA fragments showed genetic markers that did not fully match either myself or Derek in the pattern they would have expected, an anomaly so unusual that she wanted to run additional testing before drawing any conclusions at all. Derek did not wait for additional testing. Derek heard the words did not fully match either myself or Derek, and something inside him broke in a way I could see happen right in front of me. He stood up from his chair, his hands shaking, and he said, "So it's true, and I am standing here paying for a test that cannot even confirm whose child this is at all, which means it clearly is not mine," and he walked out of that office before Dr. Nwosu could even finish her sentence, before I could even fully process what had just been said, let alone correct the panic he had jumped to. I sat in that office alone, 8 months pregnant, watching my husband's back disappear through a door, and I did not even fully understand yet what Dr. Nwosu had actually told us, only that it had been enough to send him running. Dr. Nwosu, to her credit, sat with me for nearly an hour after he left, explaining as gently as she could that what she had found was not evidence that Derek was not the father. It was something else entirely, something so rare that she needed to consult with a colleague of hers who specialized in complex prenatal genetics, a geneticist at Duke University named Dr. Samuel Ackerman, before she could give either of us a definitive answer. I went home that night to an empty house, because Derek did not come home at all. He stayed with his mother for the next several days, and when I called him, he either did not answer or answered only long enough to tell me he needed space to think, that he could not be around me right now, that everything felt like a lie. I called Renata's name out of instinct one night, not knowing for certain but sensing somehow that she was tangled up in this somewhere, and Derek went quiet on the other end of the phone in a way that told me I was not entirely wrong, though he would not admit it to me directly, not yet. The following 2 weeks were the loneliest of my life. I was 38 weeks pregnant, essentially abandoned by my husband, waiting on results from a specialist I had never met, carrying a child whose paternity had somehow become a scientific mystery rather than a simple fact. My sister Camille moved in with me temporarily, refusing to let me go through my final weeks of pregnancy alone, and Isaac Marsh, my neighbor, the very man whose innocent friendship had somehow become the center of this entire storm, brought over dinner most evenings without ever once asking me to explain myself, because he had known me long enough to know there was nothing to explain. I went into labor 3 days before my due date, in the middle of the night, with only my sister beside me, because Derek did not answer his phone when I called him from the hospital. I delivered a healthy baby girl at 4:47 in the morning, and I named her Grace, because in that moment, despite everything, I felt an overwhelming need to hold on to something that sounded like forgiveness, even if I was not yet certain who would need forgiving. Derek showed up at the hospital nearly 6 hours after Grace was born, his eyes red, his hands trembling, standing awkwardly at the doorway of my recovery room, like a stranger uncertain whether he had permission to enter. He looked at our daughter through the little hospital bassinet glass, and something in his face softened, though the tension between us had not gone anywhere. He told me Dr. Ackerman, the specialist from Duke, wanted to see all 3 of us as soon as I was cleared for travel, because he believed he finally understood what had happened, and he wanted to explain it to us in person, together, before either of us made any decisions we could not take back. 2 weeks later, with Grace sleeping in a car seat between us, Derek and I sat in Dr. Ackerman's office at Duke University Medical Center, along with Dr. Nwosu, who had traveled up from Charlotte specifically to be part of this conversation. Dr. Ackerman was an older man, gray-haired, with the kind of unhurried, gentle manner that made you trust him almost immediately, and he opened a folder full of genetic charts and diagrams before he began speaking. He explained that what they had discovered, after weeks of additional testing on both myself and Grace, was a condition called chimerism, a rare genetic phenomenon that occurs when 2 fertilized eggs, meaning what would have originally been fraternal twins, fuse together into a single embryo very early in pregnancy, resulting in one person who carries 2 distinct sets of DNA within different parts of their body, rather than the single uniform genetic code most people carry throughout their entire system. He explained that somewhere in the very earliest days of my own mother's pregnancy with me, decades before I was even born, this fusion had likely occurred, meaning I had absorbed a twin sibling in the womb before that sibling's cells fully merged into my own developing body. The result, he explained, was that different parts of my body carried subtly different genetic material, a fact that almost never causes any visible symptoms or health issues throughout a person's entire life, and that most people who are chimeras never find out, because there is rarely any reason for them to undergo the kind of deep genetic testing that would reveal it. In my case, the fetal DNA fragments circulating in my bloodstream during pregnancy, which the initial test relied upon, happened to reflect a genetic profile from a different cell lineage within my own body than the reproductive cells that had actually contributed to conceiving Grace, creating a mismatch that made it appear, on paper, as though the baby's DNA did not align cleanly with either parent, when in reality, Grace was 100% biologically both of ours, conceived in exactly the way we always understood. Dr. Ackerman had confirmed this beyond any doubt through additional, more targeted testing, directly comparing Grace's DNA to multiple different tissue samples taken from different parts of my own body, and the results were unambiguous. Grace was our daughter, fully, completely, in every biological sense that mattered, and the anomaly that had upended our entire marriage over the past 2 months was nothing more than an extraordinarily rare quirk of my own biology, something that had been sitting dormant and undetected inside me since before I myself had even been born. I remember watching Derek's face as Dr. Ackerman explained all of this, watching the color drain out of it, watching him press his hands against his eyes and sit in silence for what felt like an eternity before he finally spoke. He apologized, right there in that office, in front of both doctors, in a voice that cracked apart halfway through his own sentence. He told me he should have trusted me from the very beginning, that Renata's comments should never have carried more weight in his mind than 6 years of marriage and a lifetime of knowing exactly who I was, that he had let his own insecurity and someone else's bitterness convince him of something his own heart should have refused to believe. I will not pretend that forgiving him was simple or immediate. It took months of counseling, months of hard conversations, months of Derek proving through consistent action rather than words that he understood the depth of what he had put me through during the most vulnerable weeks of my entire life. Renata, once the truth came out, was confronted by Derek's own mother, in a conversation I was not present for but heard about secondhand, and she was quietly, permanently distanced from the rest of the family afterward. Her role in planting those seeds of doubt, something none of us were willing to simply overlook or excuse. Isaac Marsh, my neighbor, remained exactly what he had always been, a kind friend who checked on us from time to time, who watched Grace grow from a newborn into a little girl, who called him Uncle Isaac, with no complicated history behind that title at all, just genuine affection, built on genuine kindness. Grace is 4 years old now, and there are days when I still think about those weeks, about how close we came to losing everything over a scientific anomaly that had nothing to do with love or loyalty or truth, and everything to do with a piece of hidden biology I never knew I carried. I think about how easily a lie, repeated often enough by someone with the right access and the wrong intentions, can nearly unravel something that took years to build. And I think about how grateful I am that science, in the end, was patient enough and thorough enough to find its way back to the truth, even when a human heart nearly gave up before it got there. After everything Vanessa had been through, she thought the hardest part of her story was discovering the truth about her DNA. She was wrong. The hardest part was learning whether the people she loved could truly change after they had hurt her so deeply. When Derek returned home after the doctors confirmed that Grace was their daughter, Vanessa did not run into his arms. She did not pretend that everything was suddenly normal. She stood there quietly, holding their baby, and looked at the man who had once promised to protect her, but had become the person who caused her the most pain. Derek expected anger. He expected rejection. But what he saw in Vanessa's eyes was something even more painful: disappointment. She told him, "The test proved that Grace is yours, but it also showed me something else. It showed me how quickly you stopped believing in me." Those words stayed with Derek longer than any scientific explanation ever could. For years, Derek believed he was a man who valued facts, evidence, and truth because he was a lawyer. But Vanessa made him realize that sometimes the most important truths in life cannot be found in documents or reports. Sometimes they are found in the heart of the person standing beside you. Derek knew he could not fix everything with one apology. He knew flowers, gifts, and promises would not erase the nights Vanessa cried alone while carrying their child. So he made a decision. Instead of asking Vanessa to forgive him quickly, he decided to spend the rest of his life showing her that he deserved another chance. He became more present. He stopped bringing work before family. He started attending every doctor appointment, every school event, every little moment he once thought was ordinary. He learned that being a husband was not just about providing a home. It was about creating a safe place where the person you love never has to question whether they are believed. Vanessa slowly began to heal, but she also learned something about herself. She realized that forgiveness did not mean pretending the pain never happened. Forgiveness meant refusing to let the pain control the rest of her life. She forgave Derek, not because what he did was acceptable, but because she wanted peace for herself and a better future for Grace. Years later, Grace grew into a bright and confident little girl who loved asking questions about everything. She had her father's curiosity and her mother's compassion. One evening, while looking through old family pictures, Grace noticed a photo of Vanessa and Derek from before she was born. She smiled and asked, "Were you always this happy?" Vanessa looked at Derek and smiled softly. She answered, "No, my child. We learned that happiness is not something you find once and keep forever. It is something you choose and protect every day." Derek held his daughter's hand and looked at Vanessa with gratitude because he knew he had almost lost the greatest gift of his life. He had almost allowed someone else's jealousy to destroy a love that had survived years of struggles, sacrifices, and dreams. Renata eventually apologized, but Vanessa understood that some relationships can be forgiven without returning to the same closeness they once had. She learned that protecting your peace does not mean carrying hatred, it means knowing where to place boundaries. The experience changed everyone involved. Renata learned that a person's pain does not give them permission to destroy another person's happiness. Derek learned that suspicion can be more dangerous than any enemy because it attacks the very foundation of love. Vanessa learned that her worth was never determined by whether someone believed her. Her truth existed even when others doubted it. The biggest lesson from Vanessa's story is that trust takes years to build, but only seconds to damage. A rumor can enter a person's mind like a small crack in glass, and if it is not handled carefully, it can shatter everything around it. Before accusing someone you love, remember the moments they stood beside you. Before believing a stranger's words, remember the character of the person you know. And before walking away from someone who has given you their heart, ask yourself if you are protecting the truth or simply surrendering to fear. Vanessa's story was never just about a rare genetic discovery. It was about the discovery of something even more important, that love without trust cannot survive, but love with humility, honesty, and forgiveness can rebuild even what seems completely broken. Because in the end, the strongest families are not the ones that never face storms. They are the ones who learn how to rebuild after the storm has passed. Never let outside voices become louder than the truth you already know about the people who love you. A relationship built on trust can survive mistakes, but a relationship destroyed by suspicion may lose something that can never be replaced. Choose understanding before judgment, communication before assumptions, and love before pride.